Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 115 of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells. I've got Mike Koomar with me, and today we're previewing Feast Week. A little bit of a different look this year, Mike, at Feast Week, with some of the other MTEs getting pillaged by the Players Era Festival. It's going to be year 2 of this event in Vegas. 18 teams this year. Each team gets 2 already scheduled games, Monday and Tuesday, and depending on how the standings and the points, differential ends up, they'll get a third opponent, and that'll be either Wednesday or Thursday on Thanksgiving, and then there'll be a first place, third place, and so on game on either Wednesday or Thursday. So obviously this field is stacked, but it is taking away a little bit from the other tournaments, namely Maui, Atlantis, some of the other ones. So what are your thoughts on all this new Feast Week look?
Yeah, pretty crazy that, Players Era is buying teams out of their already negotiated MTEs that they're playing in. For example, my Baylor Bears, they are playing the Players Era. They were supposed to be in Maui this upcoming week. Maui's always my favorite tournament to watch. I always really enjoy the Battle for Atlantis as well. So, I don't love that they're being poached by Players Era, but this is going to be such an exciting tournament to watch. I'm gonna have to find a way to get TNT and True TV next week for these games, but you're talking about 16 high level or 18 high level basketball programs. You're probably going to see about 12 to 14 of them in March. So it feels like we're almost getting a mini March Madness here in November, and that's the really exciting part of this series.
And last year was Monday, Tuesday, Friday, and especially from the games that weren't the championship or third place game, you had some really sleepy efforts. Don't think that's going to happen as much. I know
Yeah,
third game in 3 days, you get some real ugly basketball, but I think that's probably better than 1, 2, and then 2 days off, and then a third. But I do
absolutely.
have the November 24th schedule up here, Mike. We're starting at 10 a.m. local time, and between the MGM and the Michelob arenas, 2 at the same time, we are getting all day basketball, which is sort of the best part of Feast Week, Conference Tournament Week, and then March Madness. It'll be noon to midnight, and potentially even later for us on the East Coast with UNLV in Maryland tipping off at midnight Eastern time. So if you want 14 hours straight of college basketball, you're going to get it with just the Players Era. Um, we've got some great teams in here, Mike. Like I said, the 2 opponents are already guaranteed for the first 2 games. Obviously, you have no conference foes playing each other in the first 2 games, but you'd have to think that it is possible that it happens where a conference opponent will play another conference opponent and it will not be a conference game like we saw in Atlantis last year with West Virginia and Arizona playing,
Yeah.
especially when those tournaments were, filled with teams before they changed conferences. But obviously, there's a few teams that we're looking out for here. Why don't you pick one team and we can go over what they're potentially looking at here in Vegas?
Look, I think one team I'm really intrigued to see is Creighton. Right? We've seen Creighton get beat up so far this season in some of their early games, and we're not really sure what kind of team that we've got. Do we actually have a tournament team? Are we going to have more than 2 tournament teams in the Big East? I think that's a real legitimate question right now, and I don't think they'll be able to run through the actual conference play of the Big East so far, but they're going to have a couple of tough games, especially that game against Iowa State. That's going to be a really tough one. You looked at a team that got blown off the floor against Gonzaga at the Kennel earlier this year. So I think that's a team that is really intriguing right now. They were supposed to be that third buffer team in the Big East that was going to be able to hold their own and make the tournament. But after that Gonzaga game, they left a lot left on the floor. And so I'm really intrigued to see what they're going to look like in this game.
Yeah, that pod to me, and for those who can see, it's the 2 o'clock and the 4:30 pod. It's Big East, Big East, Big 12, Big 12. Creighton is
Yeah.
playing Baylor on Monday. St. John's is playing Iowa State, and we'll swap them for day 2. Creighton gets Iowa State. St. John's gets Baylor. That's probably the best pod, and some of them aren't. You know, some of them aren't organized that way, like where opponents play each other and then the other opponents play each other. But that's the one for me that
That's a
has the
true pod.
4 best teams. Creighton obviously needs, like we said with UConn on our last episode, they need to bolster their resume before conference play starts. Um, They got blown out on the road by a really good team. Was that just a great performance from Gonzaga? Are they really good? Um, but on the other hand, Creighton has not covered in 2 of their 3 bye games so far. So are they a little bit worse than what the computers, what the eye test says? Potentially. Would it be funny if they played Gonzaga again? Yes, it would be. I felt like that happened a few times a couple years ago, um, but I don't think we've seen very many non-conference games, non-conference opponents play twice. But especially with what I just said about Creighton, Mike, that's the same with St. John's. They need some big wins too, and they're going to
Yeah.
get 2 good chances on it. There's a real good chance, I'd say probably above 50%, that all 4 of those teams are in the NCAA tournament. Somebody's going to leave with 2 good wins, at
Yeah,
least.
absolutely. And one of those teams is going to leave with 2 to 3 losses,
Yeah.
and that's going to really
So
be
somebody does have to lose 3 times, at
yeah.
least. Maybe 2 teams. I don't know how 18 teams works, but
And multiple teams will
yeah,
probably lose 3 times. And for me, I think that's a concern as a Baylor guy. I look at this and Creighton and St. John's. One, I think is a better team, and two, probably has a little bit of revenge after last year's crazy game in Baha Mar. For those that don't remember, look it up. And also Creighton, they're coming to this tournament hungry. They need something to go their way in order to get some momentum going into the season after getting absolutely destroyed by Gonzaga. So they're looking for something. I think another team, Sean, that I'm interested in is Syracuse. Another team, they've shown a whole lot of pros so far this year, and maybe Syracuse basketball is finally back. I mean, it's been years since they've been relevant. I don't think they've lost a game yet this year. They've played a pretty easy schedule, but with the exception of Monmouth, they've blown everybody out. We'll see what they've got. They're going to have 2 really tough teams, 2 Big 12 teams as well. They're going to have to play Houston, second-ranked team in the country, and then they're going to have to play Kansas. That Kansas game, I think, is going to be big for how we see Syracuse the rest of the year.
yeah, that is another. I believe that's another one of those pods with Kansas and Notre Dame. So does Kansas play Syracuse? No. So Rutgers plays Notre Dame.
No,
So it's not
yeah,
really a pod. It's more of a 3 with Rutgers and Tennessee also. But I think the second headline for the conference after the Big East is the ACC here. The ACC has looked pretty good so far. You have teams like Virginia, NC State, Wake Forest showing a little bit of life here to maybe get that league to 5 or 6 bids. These 2 teams aren't really in that conversation yet, and if one of them or both of them are able to leave with 2 wins, that would be incredible for the ACC because these two
yeah,
teams are not going to finish near the top of that league, and they're probably going to finish, a little bit over 500 in the league, 11-7, something like that. But if they win, if they have a good non-conference, that might be enough to get in. So the ACC and the Big East, the 2 conferences with 2 teams in here. Big Ten is 4, Big 12 is 4, SEC has at least 3 to my knowledge. Um, the teams with 2, the other other fans of those teams in those conferences should be rooting for those teams. There's not a better chance to get a big win for Syracuse or Notre Dame here. Notre Dame gets Tennessee, or they get Rutgers. I feel like they played that last year, and they also played in the first 4 a couple of years ago. They get Kansas. You get 2 chances for some wins there. And if you're Syracuse, you get Houston and Kansas. So, for the ACC, they're going to have to come out with one of those. But in terms of the big conferences here at Players Era, Mike, Rutgers is certainly, the bottom of the rung here in the Big Ten. But Maryland, on the other hand, they lost Pharrell Payne, a freak injury, really unfortunate for him. They end up going to overtime with Mount St. Mary's yesterday. Now, Maryland does get UNLV and Gonzaga. Rutgers gets Tennessee and Notre Dame. So potentially some of the teams that look like they'll be worse than the middle of the pack in the Big Ten might be able to leave here with a win or two.
yeah, absolutely. And I think these are the most entertaining teams is these teams in the middle of the pack, right? And you've got a lot of them, which makes it intriguing. We don't really know what Oregon's going to be like this year. Look, they've had some questionable games. They beat Hawaii by 1 and they beat Rice by 4. But who knows? This could turn a leaf for them. Notre Dame, they need a good year for Shrewsbury to keep his job there at the Irish and they've played better this year. So
Yeah.
far, it's been a better start to the season for the Irish. So maybe this could be a year. I think preseason, I said they might go to the tournament. I'd love to see that happen. But there's so many of these teams looking at this list. I mean, UNLV, San Diego State, two more of those teams. We just want to see something from. We want to
Yeah.
see some life.
Yep. And, San Diego State, very good analytically so far. They've Mangun Guath, their big, shot blocking center, just came back. They did actually lose to Troy in double overtime yesterday, so I don't know how the computers looked after that. It was late, and I didn't look since. But, you know, where for these, Gonzaga a little bit excluded from this conversation, but UNLV's already had two bye game losses. San Diego State has a bye game loss to Troy. Like, their at large hopes might hinge on what happens here in this tournament. If UNLV can get out of here with 2 wins, all of a sudden they're above 500, maybe a quad one win. Maybe they could make an at large. And then for San Diego State here, it seems like they need at least one just to get the smell of a bye game loss off their resume, because that has been something that teams have really been punished for in the past. But you have teams at the top of their league like Michigan, Alabama, like we said in our last episode, that should maybe meet in the championship. You have Houston, might be the best team in the country. Iowa State has looked really good too. I think it will be a really interesting tournament, and it will be hard to catch all the games. And then on Tuesday, when they're doing the calculations, there'll be here's the standings if the game ended now with 14 minutes left, and it's not going to look anything like what actually is going to happen there on Wednesday and Thursday. But it'll be an interesting tournament. I really don't know what to expect. There's a chance that a couple of these games are just total duds. There might not be a lot of fans there, but all of these teams are getting some really great opportunities for some resume defining wins. Should be interesting to say the least.
Yeah, and not just resume defining wins, but also a good little NIL chunk of change too that
That
these
is
teams are
correct.
competing for.
Yep.
And so that's a real big one for these schools. I think the one qualm that you could have with this is if you're a team that, let's just say, like I said, we don't know much about Syracuse. If Syracuse is a dud program again this year
Yeah.
and Houston just rolls over them, you know, it's a lot easier path for Houston to go make the finals than it is for a team like Iowa State or St. John's that has to play each other and then play another good team on top of that. So, there's definitely some flaws to this tournament, but it's unlike anything we've ever had in college basketball, and I think that's what makes it so exciting.
You have to wonder why they didn't just get 16 and do two 8-man brackets or 8-team brackets and have a 3-game, guarantee. Sort of like, the Phil Knight tournament that happened in
Yeah,
Portland happened twice now over the last 6
it
or
was a good
7
tournament.
years,
Yeah.
where they had two arenas and you had some, you know, you were able to separate conferences by that way. It might not be possible to do that anymore. To get 8 different teams from 8 different conferences without getting some of the lesser conferences involved. But Mike, if there's one team that you had to say got the best draw here of our guaranteed games, I think it has to be Kansas. You have Notre Dame and Syracuse, 2 teams that are probably on the outside of the tournament in most projections. Every other team, it seems like, is playing somebody that is at least projected to go to the tournament.
Yeah, I think that's 100% fair. I think another one that you look at, Maryland gets to play UNLV. But they do get to play Gonzaga. That'll be a tougher one.
Yeah.
Michigan, I think, also has a favorable one. They've got to play San Diego State, and then they've got to go play Auburn, which is a little tougher, but we're still learning a lot about Auburn. But yeah, 100%. Kansas has the easiest road, and I think they kind of need it too when they're trying to learn what their program's like without Damian Peterson. And this
Yep.
is going to be a great opportunity for them to learn what this program has outside of one phenomenal freshman.
All right, Mike. Well, Players Era will be really cool. There are some other tournaments. Let's get into Maui now. Probably the staple of Feast Week. It had to be I think it was the first real tournament other than the preseason NIT, which wasn't
Yep.
actually in the preseason because the games actually counted. But Maui seems to have gotten a little bit lucky here with how some of these teams have performed early in the season. You have a team in USC that killed the transfer portal. You have a team at NC State and Will Wade that have both killed the transfer portal and are ranked so far. They beat a good VCU team a couple days ago. You do have Chaminade in there, and you have Bobby Hurley in Arizona State. You have Sean Miller in Texas. Like, I think all things considered, this could have turned out worse. Now, it's not the Maui field that we've seen in the past, especially last year, but there still should be at least a good tournament in here somewhere.
Yeah, well, I mean, if I'm being honest, I think this is probably the worst Maui field we've seen in at least a decade,
But
maybe even
I
longer
think
than that.
early season performance, it could have been worse.
Oh,
The
so
Seton
much worse,
Hall's
Sean. You look at
undefeated. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Texas looks competent, right? I mean, look, Seton Hall is probably not a very good team.
No.
Arizona State, not a good team. Washington State, Boise State.
I think there's
Boise
three
State's
tournament teams here.
NC State, what USC and Texas.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are that's fair. Now, usually we're talking about Maui. We're talking about three teams that we think might make the Elite Eight or the
Yeah.
Final Four, even like last year. With that being said, look, it could have gotten a lot worse. They lost Baylor and UNLV to Players Era last minute, so they had to scramble, and that's how they got Arizona State and Washington State. So definitely two downgrades, I think, for programs going into Maui. But this is always such a fun tournament to watch. It's not going to be the same. That's not sponsored by Maui Gym this year, which is disappointing. But
Southwest.
Southwest Airlines,
Southwest Airlines Maui Invitational. Not in the
I love
Southwest.
not in the Southwest, but they do fly there.
Yeah.
Uh, But I think the team to really watch out for in this one is USC. They're probably the favorite going into this game. But we still really haven't seen them play that good a talent, if I'm being honest. They beat up on Manhattan, Cal Poly, and Illinois State. That's not the cream of the crop in terms of college basketball talent. So I think I'm going to be really curious to see, like you said, they killed it in the transfer portal. Another team that I really want to see is Will Wade's NC State program. That's been completely revitalized. They've had so much momentum this offseason. They're appearing to be a good program, and they're going to get off to a good start, I think, and have a really good opportunity to take on Seton Hall. I think it's a game that they're probably going to run Seton Hall out of the gym there at the Civic Center, but you just never know. Things can get funky when you got to travel from the East Coast all the way out to Hawaii to go play a basketball game.
And that's a 9:30 a.m. local game, Mike. And we talked about it last year with Seton Hall in Charleston. These 3-day, 3-game tournaments, you need a lot of depth and you need like toughness. And Seton Hall has that. They might be one of the few teams that is built to actually play 3 times in 3 days. It's not an 8-man rotation where everybody's playing 33 to 35 minutes. They have like 12 guys that play 20 minutes a game. I know that math doesn't add up. And they like have tough players. Like day 3 of this thing, you're out of quick hitters. You're running your offense, and the other team knows what's coming. So I think there might be a little bit of a mirage here from Seton Hall. They were terrible last year. They still won 2 out of 3 in Charleston. They beat VCU. That ended up being like a quad 3, potentially at large, devastating loss for VCU. Now VCU ended up winning the A10, so it didn't matter. But Boise State still trying to shake off that D2 loss. In my research, it's not clear whether that game counts or not. Had some arguments on X. I don't know if it still does. It did not appear on the team sheet last year. Your Baylor Bears were the example, Mike. The Arlington Baptist game did not appear on the Baylor team sheet last year. I think they've added a non-D1 games at the very bottom of every team sheet. It doesn't affect any of the rankings, ratings, analytics, any of that, or the record, but they do just throw it on the very bottom. So Boise State still wants to get that loss out of the way. If they beat USC and NC State and they're in the championship game, well, who cares about that? And then you have, Texas on the bottom who, should get to this championship game. They really should. They're significantly better than the 3 teams in their little pod. So I think Maui will be interesting. Somebody's going to come out of there with 3 wins and have a really good chance to make the tournament.
Yeah, Texas always has had the best luck though in the Maui Invitational. 2013, they lost 3 games in 3 days, including a loss to Chaminade. Fun fact. So they've been here a lot. They haven't always had the most success. With that being said, they're clearly, one of the top three teams in this, and I don't think it's very close. Look,
They might
Boise
be number
State's
one.
looked. They might be number one. I think they very well could be. You looked at the way that they competed against Duke in a game that was, once again, neutral court game in air quotes. This was in what, Raleigh, North Carolina, about 10 miles from Duke's campus. Absolutely a home game, and Texas held their own. They absolutely did. And so I'm curious to see, how they do in this because we really haven't seen much of Texas basketball since then. No real impressive games. Boise State's looked a lot better. They've won 4 straight games against Division I programs after losing to a D2 program, so that's pretty cool, including a win against the Wichita State Shockers in Boise. So the Broncos are looking better. But with that being said, I think the three teams, as we've illustrated, are clearly USC, Texas, and NC State.
Yep. So that's kind of Maui. I think, you know, the semifinals and the finals will at least be pretty interesting and mean something. Now, the fifth and seventh place game, maybe not. But, there's a reason why they put the championship game like third, I believe, just because it's the primetime slot. But there's a few other tournaments, Mike, especially some MTEs. One of them will already be over by the time this goes out. That's Baja Mart. Looks like Purdue and Texas Tech are going to play there. Potentially a huge win for whoever wins that. Battle for Atlantis, probably the biggest loser of this Players Era expansion. The 8 teams there are Vanderbilt, Western Kentucky, South Florida, VCU, Virginia Tech, Colorado State,
Bit
St. Mary's,
disappointing.
and Wichita State. I mean, there's a couple interesting teams in there. Vanderbilt has been impressive. Virginia Tech has one of the 17 great freshmen in Alvidas, something like that. St. Mary's has absolutely torched all 4 of their analytical expectations so far. There is a chance that if 2 of those 3 teams meet in the championship, the Battle for Atlantis championship could at least be interesting. But on the other hand, Mike, it's really disappointing what's happening down there in Nassau.
Yeah, and this is also one of the better tournaments. As a Baylor Bear, I love this one because Baylor's won here a couple times, so it's a place that I really enjoy to watch games. But just seems like another MTE that's just being gobbled up and poached by big money in college basketball in the disguised form of the Players Era tournament. And look, don't get me wrong, it's going to be a very exciting tournament to watch. I'm excited for it, but you just hate to see everything come down to money in college basketball and elite programs abandoning places like the Battle for Atlantis and the Maui Invitational.
And there's one more, Mike, that I want to get to. It's a 4-teamer in California, the Rady Children's Invitational, probably one of the better ones. It's got a couple of good teams. It's had a few really good games over the years, like Purdue last year winning. It's Florida, Providence, TCU, and Wisconsin.
Why a good one?
Providence needs some wins. They've lost their 2 big games so far. They play Penn State this weekend before they go out there. TCU has already lost a home game to Michigan. You have Wisconsin, who is playing against BYU. That will have already happened by the time that this goes out. And then Florida, who still is looking to, shake off that loss on opening day to Arizona. They have beaten Miami. They have a couple of okay wins in there, but a chance to pick up 2 more wins here. But Thanksgiving and then Black Friday with 3 o'clock and 5:30 tips on FS1 and Fox, and a chance here for one of these 4 teams to leave 2-0 with a couple of good wins.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is a really fun tournament, and not a whole lot of people are thinking about the Rady Children's Invitational at UC San Diego most years, but Florida's looking like a really good team. Wisconsin also could be impressive. Providence and TCU, definitely the teams that we're expecting to see in the third, fourth place game. But that being said, this is going to be a fun one. Florida, they're the defending champions. They're looking for a little bit after that, disappointing loss in the opening night against Arizona. So this is their first opportunity to kind of come back and make a statement after that game.
Yeah, so there are a few other ones that are important, but Charleston Classic. Potentially, we could talk about some of the teams that come out of there 3-0. With some at-large chances like last year, Mike at Charleston. We talked about potentially 7 of the 8 teams winning it all, and guess who actually won the thing? Drake, the 8th team. They ended up putting themselves in a great spot for the at-large for an at-large bid. They ended up not needing it because they won their conference tournament. But these things really do matter uh, months from now, and it's the best way for some of these teams to get good opponents, unless a top 20 program, and seasons could sort of go on their way depending on what happens in these MTEs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember last year, Dan Hurley was really raving on the MTE, saying that he would never be in one that was 3 games in 3 days ever again, and how
Yep.
it was terrible for his program. And like that's fine for Dan Hurley at UConn. For all but maybe 3 or 4 other programs in college basketball, there's no other way to get such quality opponents in the entire out of conference without doing something like this. And it's also really fun for the fan,
Yeah.
right? This week in November, this time is always big in the college football season. We're winding down to the end of the year, and the NFL season is really in prime. But for college basketball, this is really the beginning of what is going to be a really fun year. There's already been some incredible out of conference games that we've seen throughout the year, specifically this past week as well. But it just seems like the out of conference continues to get better and better in college basketball. And we're going to continue to see it through Feast Week next week. I'm
and
really excited.
and there are some big games, Mike, that are not part of MTEs and just sort of solo standing games here, on Thanksgiving, on Black Friday, on the weekend, and we'll preview those next week. Early next week, we're gonna go with sort of a MTE reaction on Monday night, uh, recap some of the action from the weekend, preview some of the bigger games like Duke and Illinois on Black Friday. But we're gonna leave it here for now. Thank you everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.